And thank you very much, Mr. Boyd. Let's go right to our newsmaker line, and Congressman Ron Paul is joining us. Good morning. Welcome back to Iowa, sir.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
You're a busy fellow. I've been watching you all weekend long. I don't understand where you get your energy from.
Well, all I know is I am blessed and I feel good and I feel very energetic, so I feel very lucky.
And probably a lot of, because you're a doctor, you can get some really, really interesting drugs too, right?
Oh, that's it. But my theory is that you do need to do a lot of exercising, both physically and mentally. It helps me.
You do a lot of writing too. I've got a copy of your most recent endeavor. You've put a number of your think pieces and speeches in it. It is extremely well done, and people ought to read that book before they start considering you and anybody else for presidency, because you've spent a great deal of your life pondering how stuff should work.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I hope people will take your advice.
We talked earlier this morning with some folks from the Tea Party who are advocating the gold standard. You have talked about a variation on that, as well as been an ongoing critic of the Federal Reserve System for as long as I can remember. Walk me through what needs to be done.
Yeah, well, I have. And I was on the Gold Commission even back in the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan was president, and we talked about the issue. And since that time onward, my position has been, the system is not viable. It eventually will collapse. We have to have an alternative. But I've also proposed that we not wait for the collapse nor do anything too radical. That is, even though I'm for getting rid of the Fed, I'm not for closing it down one day. So my position is that we should legalize the Constitution, legalize competition, allow people to use gold and silver, repeal the taxes on money, which is the gold and silver, and just let the chips fall where they may, because I think as time goes on, more people are going to be very upset with the current banking system as well as our monetary system.
Tell me, because right now the economy is number one in everybody's mind, and over the weekend I think I saw your colleague, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, say that we ought to thank Obama for turning the economy around. Do you believe the economy has turned around, sir?
She is a dreamer. And that's why politicians lose credibility, because they fudge. But, that is pretty traditional for most politicians. If they're in charge, they put a positive spin on it. If they're not in charge, they put a negative spin on it. But, no, people say, well, we might have a double dip. But I don't even claim it's a double dip. I think it's a continuation of the problems we had. And the only thing we've seen are some government statistics that have improved, but they also spent about $3 trillion trying to get a stimulus. So I would say very, very poor results. The people unemployed are still unemployed, and there's no reason to be optimistic, because they haven't been honest with themselves and with the people on how this thing came about. And if they don't know how the bubbles are formed, they're never going to know how to handle them when the bubbles burst.
I was reading an article last week, and I didn't see this as this was occurring, but apparently our Treasury Department has been dipping into the pension funds of retired federal employees in order to keep the money coming in, and have borrowed like $80 billion from the pensions of former federal employees. How did that happen? And what are they going to get, an IU like the Social Security system has?
Yeah, and they've done that over the years when the national debt had not been increased, on the instant it needed to be. So they always fudge it by borrowing from these funds. So it's just a churning of funds. It's shifting funds from here and there and putting IOUs in it, and They just depend on the fact that eventually they're going to borrow and spend and print money in order to cover themselves. They're just looking for this technicality, of the debt limit. They're avoiding the restraints placed on them by doing these kind of things. But it's not brand new, but they've never done it to the extent they're doing it now.
Well, if you were a retired federal employee, would you be worried?
Well, everybody should be worried whether you're getting Social Security or these retirement benefits, because even when they put the money back, it doesn't have real value. They are computer entries, but they are obligations, and they're supposed to put restraints on people. But, the computer entries for Social Security or Medicare, and all these pension funds, what they should be worried about is when they get their checks, which they always will, is what the purchasing power of that money will be. That's where the real default comes. They will not stop sending the checks, but they're only going to cover it with this. Pretty soon it'll be QE3 and QE4. They'll just keep massively increasing the money supply, which means devaluation and depreciation of the money.
If right now you were the president of the United States and you had a majority to work with, and you could actually get done what you want to do, how would you repair the American economy?
Well, there's no snap reason to do it, and politically it's difficult because the one thing you have to do is get your hands off it and allow some of this liquidation of all these bad investments and bad debt. But we are doing everything to prevent that from happening, and that's why, because politically it's not acceptable. But in the bailout, what we did was the people that were holding all this bad debt and these derivatives and these mortgages, they were worthless, and they didn't want the companies to go bankrupt. They didn't want the banks to go bankrupt. So we, the taxpayers, ended up buying these through the Federal Reserve, and they created the money out of thin air. So in the old days, the Federal Reserve held gold. Then they hold a lot of Treasury bills. Now they hold these mortgages that have no value. It's the biggest fraud, probably the biggest one in the history of mankind when you look at the trillions and trillions of dollars of fraudulent holdings. But to say that you have to change things means that you have to allow the liquidation of debt. You'd have a bad year, but then you can go back to work again. But you'd have to do some other things. You'd have to massively cut the spending. You'd have to decide we're not the policemen of the world. You'd have to get the Federal Reserve to quit monetizing debt, and you have to deregulate the economy. But like you say, if I were president and we had a Congress, you could achieve this. But today they're not even suggesting it. They're only doing the things over and over again that caused our crisis, and they think we're going to get out of our crisis by doing the same thing over and over again.
We're looking at a very bumpy ride ahead, aren't we, sir?
There's no doubt about it, and the biggest bump that I worry about is the loss of personal liberty, because as things get more turbulent, then government gets bigger, and it always undermines our personal liberties. And I am so convinced that a society that is free, regardless of where we stand right now, if we're free to take care of ourselves and free to work and free to keep what we earn and preserve the traditions of America, it wouldn't take us that long to get back on our feet again. But unfortunately, too many people have lost their confidence, in the way the system works. They think the government has to take care of us. They have to be taking care of us from cradle to grave. And it's that loss of confidence that we have to reverse, because if we were allowed to take care of ourselves and we had small government there designed to protect our liberties and protect free markets and sound money, it would not be that difficult.
We have become, as some people have suggested, a nation of dependence. About 46% of the American people receive some kind of a benefit from one or more levels of government programs. And as of a couple of days ago, Obama, through an executive order, decided to grant benefits, health benefits to federal employees that are same-gender couples. Just executive order, just wrote it into existence and started expanding our safety net. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think it's horrible. I think these laws passed by executive order are illegal. I think the only thing a good president could do would be to use the executive orders to repeal executive orders that were legislatively designed. So that is wrong. They should not be doing that, and only Congress should be writing laws. Matter of fact, I don't even think that the executive branch should write any type of regulations, let alone the president just writing executive orders. But regulations are laws, and I would like to think that we need a president someday that will actually shrink the size of the Federal Reserve rather than adding tens of thousands of pages every year.
What about signing orders? What about signing statements when the president decides to go out and actually sign a budget or sign a legislation into law?
Well, it's illegal. It's unconstitutional. If a president doesn't like a bill, even if it's a small portion of the bill, he should veto the bill. I mean, these signing statements is sort of like a line-item veto. He says, oh, okay, 80% of the bill's okay, but this 20% I don't like, and I don't intend to follow it. But the Congress should stand up to that, and for years they've just allowed presidents to do it. So that to me is what's so disappointing.
I was watching you chatting with a journalist the other day, and he was inviting you to add to or enhance the War Powers Act, and dealing with Libya and perhaps even our not-so-subtle dealing with Syria. Apparently we're involved there, and we don't to what degree, I have no way of knowing. But it was interesting, your response is we don't need to enhance the War Powers Act. We still have a Constitution. Embellish that.
Well, the War Powers Act was designed supposedly to restrain the president to go to war without permission, but actually it weakened the constitutional provision because the president literally can go to war for 90 days, and then Congress has to be proactive and demand. And we're trying to do that, get a coalition in the Congress, and it's very, very difficult. Once the president engages, it's hard to stop them. But so the War Powers Resolution is quite controversial. But the Constitution is not very confusing. It's very clear. Presidents are not allowed to go to war, without a declaration, and that's where the problem is.
Are you and Dennis Kucinich going to become buddies on these issues here pretty soon?
Well, we're pretty good friends on some issues. We do work together, and I think that's the way our problem should be solved, building coalitions. Not compromising, but coalitions. Yeah. But he and I wouldn't agree on a lot of the economic issues.
Well, it's interesting that he's been consistent on this issue, just like you have. When it comes to the war and making war and war powers, he says we have this thing called a Constitution. He only finds a Constitution dealing with war powers.
It's a real delight to work with people that work on principles, even though there may be some disagreements. So if his Democratic president is wrong, he will challenge them, and he knows that I've been willing to challenge our own party. So those are the kind of people I like to deal with.
What do you think is likely to happen in the Middle East, granted that the Congress is not pushing on this president and making him accountable for expanding? We're on 4 fronts over there rather than 1 and then 2. We are in 4 different places.
It's horrible. Now we're over there. We're supporting the rebels in Libya, and Al-Qaeda is probably part of that group. But we're sending weapons to the government in Bahrain to suppress their people, and they're shooting people and trying to break up their demonstrations. So it depends on which one, which country's being attacked. If they're our buddies and it has something to do with oil, then we support them. If not, then we join the opposition, and NATO goes in and stirs up the civil strife. That's why I think the non-interventionists stay out of the entangling affairs, the internal affairs of nations, is such a positive step.
Ron Paul, thank you for joining us. I'm sure you're getting ready for the debates in New Hampshire, and you're getting ready to do some talking in Dubuque. And welcome back to Iowa, sir.
Very good. Thanks a lot.
You bet. See you later. Wow, we got a lot accomplished in a short period of time. I hope you were listening. A lot of good stuff you just heard.